Alright guys, or girls, today we're going to do a simple rejet, or how to rejet, how to adjust a carburetor on your motorcycle. This is the first carburetor I picked up off the shelf, so this is the one we're going to use for example, but this will apply to any Mikuni, whether it's a genuine or a clone, or a Keihin clone or genuine, or as well your Nibbi carburetors. The only difference between one of these or a Nibbi would be, instead of a Phillips head to remove the float bowl, you would be using a Allen key metric size 3, I believe, is what removes the float bowl. So before we get into the carburetor, I think we're going to start with the needle jet, since this seems to be ignored quite often, but it's pretty important. In order to remove your needle jet, there's just a little clip inside of here. Normally you can just push the needle jet out and the clip will come out. On the Nibbi, they are seated in there very good, so you will end up needing either a small flathead or something like this, just a little dental pick. And with the Nibbis, usually the easiest way is to come in here on the notch and just push up to get the clip initially popped out. Do this in a place where if that clip does happen to go flying, you can see where it lands, but try to keep your fingers over top of the slide barrel. That way the clip doesn't go flying somewhere and you don't lose it, because you do need that. So with your needle jet, if this decides to focus, come on, wait. So you have 5 notches here and a little E-clip. So in order to get these off, normally what I use, a little pair of needle nose pliers, go on the top and just press out. And now your clip's off. So normally you'll find you'll have a 5-position needle jet, and these usually come in the center position, which is roughly where you would want to start. And then essentially, if you go higher on the clip, you are lowering the needle jet further down, which essentially leans your mid-range. Or if you reverse that and you lower the clip, you essentially are raising the needle jet, allowing more fuel, which essentially richens your mid-range. So we're not going to worry about putting that clip back on here now, since that's not part of what we're getting to. But remember, like I said, your needle jet's usually going to come in its center position, so there'll be 2 notches available above it and 2 notches available below it. And if you raise the clip, you are leaning, and if you lower the clip, you are richening your mid-range. Well, your mid-range going into the higher end and then your main jet will pick up, or the bike will start picking up off of the main jet. So now we're going to get into the float bowl. So like I said, these are Phillips heads. If this was a Nibbi, you would just have two, and they would be an Allen head style. Again, that's metric. And I believe offhand it was a size 3. Step out of the way here. Okay, so you got your float bowl off. You always want to make sure this gasket is clean and in its groove, like that. Well, really, you always want to make sure the inside of your carburetor is as clean and sterile as possible. If it's not, you can clean it with acetone, brake parts cleaner, carbon choke cleaner, lots of different stuff you can pick up at the parts store to do so. So now you got the float bowl off, and okay, so in particular on the clones, this is your fuel mixture. It's on the bottom. Here is your pilot jet, and here is your main jet. So if this was your Nibbi, or if this was a genuine Mikuni or Keihin carburetor, you would find your mixture screw either here, you would either find it here in this area, which in return would actually label it as an air mixture screw, since it's closer to the air inlet. I'm not going to go too in depth about that, since it's tomato, they both do the same exact thing. It's just where they're positioned, what they're referred to. If they're closer to the fuel area, for example, if they were closer to the gas inlet or underneath, like on the clones, they are referred to as your fuel mixture. If they're closer to where your air filter mounts for the air inlet, then they are initially referred to as an air mixture screw. But either way it goes, they control your air-fuel ratio for the bike at idle to around quarter throttle. A good baseline to start with your mixture screw is roughly 2 turns from lightly seated. And I mean lightly seated as some people like to use way too much force. So you simply turn it in. Once it stops, you don't force it. Now it's lightly seated out, and it's on an angle. So now you can go back and go half turn, full turn, 1.5 turns, 2 turns. Now you might find at idle to quarter throttle that might be a hair rich, or it might be a hair lean. If at 2 turns you are lean, then your pilot jet needs to be increased in size. You do not want to put this past 2 turns. If you have to go past 2 turns, that means you need to increase your pilot jet size. So in this case, my pilot jet is correct So I actually come back to 1/8 of a turn back. Now, moving on, I'm actually going to use a little bigger screwdriver for this. So, here is your pilot jet itself. In my case, this pilot was a number 38. I don't think the camera's going to focus. Yeah, wait. Yeah. Okay, here we go. So this one is a 38 pilot. Which on a Tbr7, a Hawk, a Magician, any of the China bikes running a CG 250 clone motor. Well, we call it a CG 250, but it's 229cc motor stock. If you have an exhaust, if you put a full exhaust system on the bike, or if you removed your catalytic converter and modified the bike silencer, you're going to be around a 36 to a 38 pilot jet. If something I wanted to cover here real quick, since these carburetors don't have it, if this was a Nibbi, there would be a little white plastic cover in this area. So you would have to pop a little white plastic cover off of there in order to expose your pilot and your main jet. Now, sometimes whenever you go, yeah, there we go, it did it. Sometimes whenever you go to remove your main jet, it'll come out like that. That's no problem. Get yourself a pair of needle nose pliers, just anything like that. It doesn't take much pressure. You just squeeze down. I mean, you can get a wrench, but that's all. Now your main jet's cracked loose. Remove the main. And in this case, again, we're running a 120 main. Yeah, okay, it shows up. Alright, so like I said, we're running a 120 main because of the modifications this bike has. That was a good balance for me at around 1,200 feet elevation. I mean, that about covers, you know, your jetting. If you wanted to change your jetting, get yourself a jet kit. For example, this one's a 35. If your bike was stock, a 35, a 34, 35, 36 main jet, or I'm sorry, a pilot jet works pretty good. And again, for a stock bike, anything between a 105 to a 115 is good for your main jet. From here, with the carburetor sitting flat, you want to look at your float. So you want your float, you don't want your float to sag down. You want your float to be parallel with the body of the carburetor. So in this case, this one's right about on. It's, you know, next to a nothing. Just a tiny little hair higher. That's perfectly fine. If it was dramatically higher or dramatically lower, there's a little tab right here that you can adjust to get your float height set. And then you just spring it a few times, that way it goes back to its natural position, and if it's where you want it to be, you can go ahead and move forward. So like I said, this obviously is not a Nibbi, so there is not a plastic cover to put back over in place of the area where your pilot and your main jet is. From there, you just want to take a second to make sure your jets, and you're not torquing them in there. You just want them to be snug. You don't want them to come loose. You don't want to find one of your jets laying in your float bowl. So that's snug back up. That's perfect. And your base gasket, your float bowl gasket, is in place. It didn't take any effort. You don't want to force the float bowl back on. Set your screws back in place. You don't want to tighten them down all the way on one side. You want to get them all equal. This way you end up with a nice good seal. You don't have any gasoline pouring out. Again, these do not have to be extremely tight. Just snug. Just go back around, check them. Okay, now they're all tight. You've now rejetted your carburetor. And like I said, for your needle jet, you would have your clip back on in the position that you wanted. You would slide your needle jet back in there. Mine's going to come out of the bottom because I do not have the E-clip on. And then for the retaining clip that does hold the needle jet in place, I just like to use a pair of needle nose pliers. Come down. Put it in the carburetor. And this is going to be kind of hard to see. Let me get a light. So your clip, you want it to be kind of positioned in that area. That way it doesn't interfere with your throttle cable. So once you put your throttle cable in there and it routes up. That clip could get in the way of your throttle cable, cause you a headache, so you just want to position the clip in there. That way it's out of the way of where your throttle cable likes to sit. From there, inside of the carburetor, I'm sorry here, the lighting isn't that great. There's two notches, so on one side you'll see your idle mixture, your idle set screw. That ends up with the shorter side notch on your throttle slide barrel. Slide that in like so. It's seated, and then you'd go back to your bike. If you were changing carburetors, if this wasn't a rejet and you were actually changing carburetors, let me get this out of the way here. I believe I have a cable. No, I do not have an extra cable. Alright. So, if this was a new carburetor, you weren't simply rejetting, you would slide this onto the cable first, get the cable through here, get your spring on. This part can be a little bit annoying to do sometimes. Sometimes it goes real easy, sometimes it doesn't. You get your throttle return spring depressed like that. The cable would be coming out through here now. And then you'll bring the slide barrel down so the end of the cable can catch here. Run it up. And you'll get it together like that. From there, that's all. You just take your time to make sure that this doesn't cross thread. As these clone carburetors don't always want to go on real smooth. Just take your time, get it on there, tighten it up. Again, this is nothing you need a pair of channel locks. You don't need to crank this extremely tight. You just want to get it snug and you're done. That would be how you rejet, readjust your fuel mixture, how you change your pilot, how you change your main, and to go about reinstalling as well as adjusting your needle jet. And the simplest way I could explain it. Hopefully this helps you guys out. If you have any questions, please ask. Thanks for watching.